Today marks a significant decision in my life. I have chosen to care for Amy and Yuri. Upon my husband's return, he brought along his sister and her child. He determined that we would share our home and provide support for them. I couldn't fathom how he could prioritize his sister and niece over our own daughter and me. It became unbearable. How could he neglect his responsibilities as a husband and father? I've reached my limit. I'll end this marriage myself. Thus begins my tale of retribution against my detestable, sister-fixated husband. My name is Amelia, and I've been wedded to Ethan for 5 years. Together, we have a precious 4-year-old daughter named Luna. Our daughter, born shortly after our marriage, is simply enchanting. She's the center of our universe. My husband and daughter, they're my cherished family. However, it appears my husband doesn't share the same sentiment. One evening, as I waited for my husband's return, Luna and I busied ourselves in the kitchen preparing curry. "Mommy, when will Daddy be home?" Luna inquired. "Daddy seems to be running late today. I wonder what's keeping him," I replied. It was unusual for my husband, who typically arrived straight home from work, to be absent even past 7:30 p.m. Still no response to my calls or messages. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Luna reminded me. "All right, sweetheart, let's go ahead and eat without Daddy tonight," I replied, trying to mask my disappointment. After finishing dinner with Luna and tidying up, my husband finally walked through the door. "Welcome back." "Wait, what?" I exclaimed in confusion. Standing beside Ethan were his sister Amy and her daughter, Yuri. They were burdened with an unusual amount of luggage. "Ethan, what's going on?" I stammered, struggling to comprehend the scene before me. He then dropped the bombshell. "From today onwards, we're taking care of Amy and Yuri." "What? Take care of them?" I'm lost. Why didn't he mention anything before bringing them home? This whole situation is beyond me, I struggled to articulate. "Support them? Why the suddenness?" "I haven't heard a word about this," I added, feeling bewildered. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. What choice did I have? Amy had a fallout with her husband, so she reached out to me, Ethan explained casually. "And for how long are we supposed to support them? We barely have enough space in our apartment," I pointed out, hoping he'd recognize the inconvenience. But my husband seemed unfazed. "Can't you let them use your room?" he suggested, as if it were the most obvious solution. "My room?" I echoed, incredulous. "You can move into Luna's room. Then we'll have a spare room for Amy and Yuri," my husband suggested, as if it were the simplest solution. I was speechless. Did he expect me to accept this without protest? Why should I tolerate all of this when we're the ones providing for them? It made no sense to me. With a forced smile, my husband ushered his sister and niece inside, saying, "Make yourselves at home from now on." Without a hint of apology for the abrupt intrusion, they made themselves comfortable on the couch, engrossed in the TV. I pulled my husband aside, whispering urgently, "Have you lost your mind? Taking in Amy and Yuri out of nowhere, and our budget is already tight." My husband let out a frustrated sigh, his expression turning sour. "Come on, Amy's in a tough spot, and you're acting so heartless. Can't you show a little compassion?" My husband chided. "It's not about lacking compassion. I don't mind them staying temporarily, but fully supporting them is a different matter. They should at least chip in for groceries," I argued. "What? You're being downright miserly. Amy's not even working. It's obvious she can't contribute," he retorted, accusing me of being stingy. "Your opinion doesn't concern me. My sister needs help. As the head of this household, I've decided to assist her, and you should respect that," he declared firmly, before diverting his attention to games with them. To add insult to injury, the curry I'd saved for tomorrow disappeared, devoured by my husband and his guests. Throughout the evening, I endured my husband's scolding. "Make sure you prepare more nutritious meals for my niece," he demanded. It struck me, had my husband ever shown this level of concern for our daughter's nutrition? Apparently, he could muster such care only for his beloved niece. My husband wholeheartedly sided with his sister, disregarding my feelings entirely. To make matters worse, he branded me as a miser for worrying about our finances. "She can't chip in for groceries because she's not working. That's not my problem. Regardless of their struggles, we can't afford to support them indefinitely for free," he stated bluntly. The next day, and the day after that, my husband doted on his sister and niece, barely acknowledging me and our daughter. Amy, I picked up the cake you wanted, he announced. Oh, thank you, Ethan, Amy replied, her gratitude directed solely at him. I spotted some toys from Yuri's favorite cartoon on sale. I couldn't resist getting them, my husband mentioned casually. Sure, go ahead, I replied, trying to hide my disappointment. The cake was exclusively for his sister and niece, and naturally, the toy was intended only for his niece. Both our daughter and his niece were around the same age, so it wasn't difficult to imagine that our daughter would also appreciate some cake and toys. But I had to endure a little longer. Once his sister reconciled with her husband, they would leave our home, and our family life would revert to its usual rhythm. Repeating this mantra to myself, I managed to suppress my frustration. Then one day, my daughter approached me with a heart-wrenching question. Mom, does Dad like Yuri more than me? What? Why do you think that? I asked, taken aback. He seems to only pay attention to Yuri. He doesn't even respond when I talk to him, she explained tearfully. I was speechless, engulfed in a wave of sadness. Pulling her close, I held her tightly, unable to find the right words to console her. Don't worry, Luna. He's your dad, I reassured her, though inside, I knew the situation couldn't continue. A few days later, I confronted my husband about his behavior. Luna's feeling neglected. It's great that you love Yuri, but you need to make time for Luna as well, I urged. Fine. It's just so much effort, he grumbled. Effort? Our daughter is Luna, not Yuri, I reminded him. Yeah, I understand. I'll make an effort to pay attention to Luna, he conceded. Despite my efforts to communicate my daughter's feelings, nothing changed. I watched as my daughter gazed at my husband, who was joyfully engaged with our niece, her eyes filled with sorrow. It seemed futile to expect my sister-in-law to step in and care for our daughter in my husband's absence. They were always focused on Yuri. I was the sole source of attention for our daughter, yet she still seemed lonely. A month went by, and our family was crumbling under the strain. Financially, we were barely scraping by. Moreover, no matter how much I tidied, our apartment remained in disarray because my sister-in-law and niece never lifted a finger to help. Meanwhile, my husband continued to lavish attention on his sister and niece, neglecting both our daughter and me. I couldn't endure this any longer. I've had enough. This has gone too far. Can we please have a serious discussion about our future? I confronted my husband, my frustration boiling over. What's gotten into you all of a sudden? I've been saying the same thing repeatedly, haven't I? Life is becoming increasingly difficult, and what's your plan regarding Amy and her predicament? You're not suggesting we live like this indefinitely, are you? He retorted. What choice do we have? She's in the midst of a marital dispute, I explained. Then shouldn't she consider divorce or try to resolve things with her husband? It's been a month already. Luna and I are reaching our breaking point. Please take our feelings into consideration, I pleaded. I knew broaching this subject would upset Ethan, but I had to advocate for Luna and the future of our family. Luna adores you, you know, but when she sees her dad showering affection only on his niece, it's bound to hurt her. I prioritize Luna's feelings over my own, I expressed to my husband. Ethan's a father as well. He should understand how much Luna is hurting and adjust his behavior, I added, hoping for some empathy. But his response left me speechless. Amy is family, right? She's your family too. How can you say such cold things? You're heartless, he accused me. Heartless? Me? I was taken aback by his accusation. It's not that I dislike Amy and Yuri. I just want our situation to change. But Ethan made it seem like I was the villain in all of this. I always knew you were cold-hearted, Ethan accused. Amy's struggling, and Yuri misses her dad. I have to give them attention. You're there for Luna, so why can't you handle it? Whoa, hold on, I protested. I'm covering all the household expenses. Why should Luna and I suffer? My salary contributes to our family budget, you know. But Amy is my sister. That makes her your family too, yet you're always so distant, Ethan argued, laying the blame squarely on me. His cold gaze made it clear that his sister and niece took precedence over our daughter. Then he dropped a bombshell that left me stunned. Amy wants to stay here, so we'll be taking care of them from now on. We're responsible for everything: food, clothing, and shelter. In that moment, all my hopes shattered. I realized I was foolish to believe that talking would lead to understanding. Our old life was gone, irretrievably lost. I met Ethan's gaze squarely and uttered, "Fine, then let's get a divorce." Huh. My husband's expression morphed into one of disbelief. He seemed utterly perplexed by my declaration. After a tense silence, he stared at me incredulously. Divorce? What on earth are you suddenly talking about? You're joking, right? Do you honestly believe I'd joke about something like this? If you're going to dismiss mine and Luna's feelings, then I won't prioritize yours either. I'm going to make the best decision for Luna and ensure our happiness, I affirmed, resolute in my stance. He probably never anticipated me raising the topic of divorce. His disbelief was palpable as he scoffed, talking about divorce. You couldn't possibly handle raising Luna on your own. Sure, single parenting is challenging, but it's far better than enduring this. If you're serious, then go ahead and file for divorce. I'll even sign the papers. But remember, if you have a change of heart later and decide you don't want a divorce, it'll be too late, I asserted firmly. Do you really think I'd back down? I produced the papers I'd prepared earlier and handed them, along with a pen, to him. He froze upon seeing the divorce papers before him, making no move to fill them out. What's the matter? Aren't you going to fill out the papers? I pressed, urging him to take action. Oh no, he muttered, visibly shaken as I placed the pen in his hand. Come on, fill it out. You said you would, didn't you? No, I was just joking, he protested weakly. What a joke. You dared me to divorce you, claiming it'd be too late to change your mind later, and now you're too scared to follow through. Pathetic, I spat out in frustration. Shut up. I'll fill it out, okay? He snapped, scribbling his signature on the paper and thrusting it at me. There, I signed it, happy now. Get out, you're annoying, he ordered, his irritation evident. I remained composed as I countered, no, you're the one who's leaving. What? Huh? What do you mean? Huh? He spluttered in disbelief. This apartment is under my name, remember? And since you started supporting your beloved sister, even with your contribution, we couldn't cover our living expenses, so I had to foot the rent alone. Yet you had the audacity to keep living here without any guilt. Are you stupid? Are you out of your mind? Suddenly, a voice interrupted our argument. Wait a minute, what's going on here? Amy, my sister-in-law, rushed over and grabbed Ethan by the collar. Then she exclaimed, you promised we could stay here indefinitely. So you were lying. Amy, it's not. What do you mean, it's not? I trusted you to keep us in your home forever. I can't believe you're throwing us out. I didn't expect things to escalate like this, Ethan stuttered. Ha! You can't even handle your own wife, she taunted. What did you say? Ethan bristled. I had reached my breaking point with their argument. I gathered my sister-in-law and her children's belongings and tossed them out onto the doorstep. Hey, wait, what are you doing? Amy approached me, clearly agitated. But now that I had decided to divorce Ethan, I felt no obligation to protect her. I'm just removing someone else's belongings. Actually, you're trespassing. Could you please leave as soon as possible? I replied calmly, causing Amy to shrink back. You don't have to throw out our stuff. And you, Ethan, she turned to my ex-husband. Could you please leave us as well? I have no need for either of you anymore, I stated firmly. What kind of thing is that to say to your husband? Ethan protested. You're not my husband anymore. You're my ex-husband, I stated firmly. I never realized you could be so heartless, Ethan muttered in disbelief. Well, that's your problem now. You've crossed the line. If you think your sister and her child are more important than our own, then why don't the three of you happily live together? I retorted. Where are we supposed to go if we leave here? Are you seriously kicking us out? Ethan protested. I don't care. Do whatever you want. Now, get out. I'll call the cops if you don't, I declared, my patience wearing thin. Once I confirmed that Ethan and his sister's family had reluctantly left, I shut the door behind them. It was unlikely I'd see them again. Glancing around the room, I noticed my daughter, Luna, staring at me with a puzzled expression. Mama, where's Daddy gone? She asked innocently. I'm sorry, Luna. Do you think it's okay if it's just Mama and you from now on? I inquired gently. Luna hesitated for a moment, her expression thoughtful, but then her smile returned. I'll be okay as long as Mama's here. I'm fine as long as I'm with you, she reassured me. She rushed into my arms and I held her tightly. Yes, even without my husband, we would be all right. Together, just the two of us, we could find happiness. Later on, I arranged for their belongings to be shipped to my husband's parents' house and explained the situation over the phone. It seemed my husband and his sister's family had indeed returned to their parents' house as anticipated. However, it appeared they had been disowned and ejected from the house by their irate parents. Consequently, my ex-husband rented a small apartment where he now resides with his sister and niece as a trio. It seemed like that was their desired outcome, but I couldn't care less. I later learned that my sister-in-law's marital discord stemmed from her extravagant spending habits. Now, she was being compelled to repay the money she had squandered from her husband. Almost every day, my ex-husband inundated me with cringe-worthy texts. "I made a mistake, please forgive me. I love you and Luna more than anything. I want us to reunite as a family." Needless to say, I ignored every one of them, promptly consigning them to the trash folder. Luna doesn't want to see her dad anymore, so we don't have any plans to meet him. I'm considering moving us out of this place soon, as it could become problematic if they were to show up unexpectedly. For my daughter, I want to shower her with love and provide her with everything she needs. Even without a father figure, my priority is to ensure she lives a happy and fulfilling life. Finally, Dad's passed away. What a relief. He was a stubborn old man with money, but he was nothing but a nuisance. On the day of the funeral, Alex's expression was more of a smirk than sadness. "How can you say that?" he scoffed. "You had debts that Dad took care of." "Shut up. He wouldn't die and kept racking up hospital bills. Now I can finally use his money as I see fit." "How dare you? You've been living off Dad all this time. Say what you want. You're on your own now. You're useless. Just leave." "Brother-in-law, how could you?" William chimed in, scolding Alex. Meanwhile, their sister-in-law, who was also present, laughed dismissively and said, "Marriage doesn't make you family. I'm sure even your father-in-law wouldn't want outsiders here. You should leave right away." Her words shattered something inside me. To insult my father and deny our bond, these people are truly vile. There was no point in arguing further. The last thing I wanted was to disrupt my father's funeral. I fought to keep my anger in check and resigned myself to the situation. I could barely manage to say a few words before I chose to bid my final farewell to my father and leave. I promised myself never to associate with these people again. "My name is Lily. I work as a nurse at a children's hospital. I married William, a radiologic technologist I met through work a few years ago. Our on-call schedules make it difficult to find time for just the two of us, but we treasure the moments we do have together. William's role is crucial. Imaging plays a vital part in diagnosing and treating patients. He handles numerous imaging tasks daily, always on the lookout for even the smallest abnormalities, which adds significant pressure to his job. Despite the demands of his work, I deeply respect William for his dedication. He often tells me how much he admires my commitment to communicating with patients and their families, even with my hectic schedule. Once upon a time, I could hardly imagine that I would become a source of help for others or that such joyful days would ever be in my future. My father worked for a major trading company and was often stationed abroad, leaving my mother, Alex, and me to manage on our own. In that environment, my mother and Alex treated me more like a servant than a family member. "Didn't I tell you to clean this up? You're so useless. Hey Lily, get me some juice. You've got a minute." This harsh treatment and constant demands were a regular part of my life. My mother, who was devoted to Alex, made me feel like nothing more than a bother. Seeing her behavior, Alex grew up to adopt the same domineering attitude towards me. As a child, I did everything I could to meet their expectations, but despite my efforts, both my mother and Alex continued to belittle me, even when my father returned from his overseas assignments. By the time I was in high school, their attitudes hadn't changed. Although my father tried to defend me, my mother and Alex blamed him for everything. "I raised these two all on my own while you were away," my mother would say. "You didn't lift a finger to help, and now you're back and trying to play the role of dad? We've managed just fine without you. Don't come in here acting all high and mighty." Despite my father's attempts to argue with them, no resolution was reached. Eventually, their anger shifted from him to me. Watching this, my father felt powerless to confront my mother and Alex, fearing it would only make things worse for me. Despite his presence, he was filled with regret for not being able to change their attitudes and tearfully apologized to me. "I'm sorry, but just having my father there saved me from being treated like I was useless and a nuisance by my mother and Alex. I felt as though I were lost in a dark tunnel, unsure of my own worth." Then my father told me, "Lily, you're not useless. You're not a nuisance. You're part of our family, and you're a good person who belongs here." Those words were enough to keep my spirits up, even when my mother and Alex continued to belittle and order me around. Knowing that my father was there to support me kept my heart from darkening. When it came time for me to graduate high school, my mother insisted that I start working immediately, forbidding me from attending college. Meanwhile, Alex, who barely studied, was allowed to go to a private university and waste his time. Despite this, my father refused to stay silent. He asked me what I wanted for my future and assured me that I could make my own choices. His support gave me hope and a sense of direction for my own path. After years of being at the beck and call of my mother and Alex, I had never really considered my own future. But now, I began to seriously think about what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I wanted a career where I could genuinely help people, so I decided to become a nurse. When I shared my aspiration, my father quietly took action behind the scenes. He arranged for me to attend nursing school, covering the entrance fees and finding me a place to stay, all without my mother or Alex finding out. Thanks to his efforts, I was able to enroll in nursing school without any obstacles. Since then, I only returned home when my mother passed away. Throughout nursing school and beyond, I stayed in touch with my father. When I landed my first job, passed my national exams, started dating William, and eventually decided to get married, my father was overjoyed. He celebrated these milestones as if they were his own achievements. Meanwhile, I worry about him being alone at home, but he always reassured me, saying, "I'm fine," and dismissed any concerns I raised. My father, who had always been stoic and never showed signs of weakness, mentioned during a phone call that he was feeling some discomfort in his midsection. Although he downplayed it as just a minor pain, I had a feeling he was underestimating the issue. I suggested he visit the hospital for a checkup. A few days later, he called to say that his endoscopy had shown no issues. I felt a sense of relief, but my husband, William, was not entirely convinced. He pointed out that an endoscopy might not detect all problems and recommended a cancer screening as a precaution. I passed on William's suggestion to my father and urged him to follow through. The results of the cancer screening were a devastating blow. My father had pancreatic cancer. Although the diagnosis was shocking, we were relieved to learn that the cancer was still at a stage where it could potentially be removed through surgery. My father was soon admitted for the operation. The news initially cast me into a dark place, but fortunately, the surgery was successful. When William and I visited him in the hospital, despite his evident fatigue, he greeted us with a warm smile. Just as I began to feel a bit of relief seeing my father looking better than expected, the door to his room flew open. Alex and a woman entered abruptly. Alex gave us a brief, dismissive glance before striding into the room with little regard for our presence. "Get out," he said, gesturing toward the door as if we were obstructing him. The woman with him, whom I quickly recognized as Grace, Alex's new wife, was also signaling for us to leave. From what my father had told me about Alex's marriage, I knew this had to be his wife. "Can't you wait a moment? We just got here," I protested, but Alex merely smirked at me, his expression dripping with disdain. "As if talking to Dad will make any difference." "I understand, but I've hardly had a chance to speak with him," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "Brother-in-law, please give us a bit more time," my husband pleaded with Alex. But Alex shot back bluntly. "So you're the one who married Lily, huh? I don't care if you're a radiology tech or whatever. Without doctors, nurses, and techs, none of you matter. So don't get all high and mighty." He smirked with a self-satisfied sneer. And before we could even rise from our seats, he turned to our father and began speaking with startling disregard. "Dad, I've gotten myself into debt again. I need your help." "What?" I gasped in shock at Alex's words. Instead of showing any concern for our father's condition, he was suddenly talking about money and suggesting that our father had previously covered his debts. "Alex, you need to take responsibility for your own debts. Do you even grasp what Dad is going through right now?" "Shut up. I'm making Dad pay for his past mistakes. He neglected us when we were kids. He can't just buy forgiveness with money." "What?" I was stunned by Alex's despicable behavior. His words left me speechless, and I knew I had to intervene. I was the only one who could stop him. As I struggled to find the right words to respond, my sister-in-law, standing next to Alex, shot me a puzzled look. "Don't act so superior just because you're married. You're in the way, so just go home." I couldn't hold back any longer and snapped at my sister-in-law's words. "That's enough," I shouted, forgetting that we were in a hospital room. "Lily, stop," William quickly intervened, and I was momentarily taken aback. My father then quietly said, "Lily, you should go home for today," offering us a weak smile. "Thank you for coming. You can visit again another day." At my father's words, Alex and his wife looked smug and victorious. I felt a gnawing unease about leaving my father alone with them. Despite feeling guilty for my outburst in the hospital room, I knew I couldn't continue the argument and reluctantly left. Over the next few days, I anxiously worried about my father and the tension between him and Alex. Then one day, my father developed complications. The shock of his deteriorating condition was immense. His physical and mental strength waned as he struggled to eat properly, and despite the attending physician's best efforts, he passed away a few weeks later. The grief was overwhelming, but I had no time to dwell on it. Alex and his wife were entirely unhelpful, so William and I had to handle all the funeral arrangements ourselves. On the day of the funeral, as I greeted the attendees and waited for the service to begin, Alex displayed an appalling lack of respect for the occasion. He grinned broadly and said, "I'm so relieved Dad is finally gone. He was so stubborn and only cared about money. What a nuisance." "What?" I was stunned. "Dad took on your debts and you're still speaking ill of him." "Shut up," Alex snapped. "His medical bills were overwhelming, and now I can finally access his money as I see fit." "How can you be so callous?" I demanded. "After everything Dad did for you, you still criticize him. Say what you want, but no one's on your side anymore. Just get lost." I couldn't believe my own brother-in-law's behavior. Even as William stood up for me, our sister-in-law smirked and waved us away. Being married into the family doesn't make you a real part of it. I'm sure even your father-in-law wouldn't want outsiders hanging around. Just go home. Her words were a breaking point for me. To disrespect my father and dismiss my connection to this family was beyond contempt. I knew arguing would only mar Dad's funeral, so I swallowed my rage. "Fine," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I forced myself to leave, unable to give my final farewell to Dad. I vowed never to deal with these people again. However, the next day, my phone was bombarded with calls from Alex and his wife. I had a strong suspicion about what they wanted, but I chose to ignore them. I figured if I kept avoiding them, they would eventually give up. But Alex proved me wrong. He hired a detective to track me down and showed up at my apartment. "Why aren't you answering your phone?" he demanded as soon as he saw me. "We've been trying to reach you for ages. Come out here. Do you have any idea how much trouble we went through to find you?" As soon as they saw me, they began venting their frustration, bombarding me with their grievances before I could even respond. "Is that lawyer telling the truth? That all of Dad's inheritance goes to you? That can't be right, can it? We're siblings, so the inheritance should be divided equally. Besides, you're the younger one, so you should get less." When I didn't respond, Alex's anger flared. "Say something." It was ironic that they were the ones cutting me off when they hadn't given me a chance to speak. What the lawyer said is true. I was just as shocked when I found out. "No way. So you're saying you get all of that $10 million? I'm not going to accept that." "Whether you accept it or not doesn't change anything, Alex. The decision has already been made. You think you can talk back to me? You've always been useless and you couldn't even help Dad when he needed you. You should just do as I say from now on." Alex was determined to get his hands on the inheritance, refusing to face the reality of the situation. But his efforts were in vain. Our father had explicitly excluded Alex from the list of heirs, and no amount of resistance would change that. "No way. That's a lie, Alex. You made Dad cover your gambling debts under the guise of atonement. On top of that, you used Dad's stockholder benefits without permission and sold his belongings." Dad had taken steps to ensure Alex couldn't inherit his property, citing various incidents involving Alex and my sister-in-law as reasons. "What you've done is more than enough to forfeit any claim to the inheritance. Take what's yours and leave. Don't ever come near me again." As Alex and his wife listened, their angry shouts subsided and their faces turned ashen with realization. Leaving them to grapple with their new reality, I started to head back to my room. My sister-in-law's voice, strained and desperate, cut through the silence. "Wait, please, share the inheritance with us." Even now, my sister-in-law was pleading for a share of the inheritance. When I gave her a cold look, she started to babble frantically. We didn't even need to be asked. We assumed we'd get Dad's inheritance, so we bought a condominium in the Highlands. We borrowed money from a risky lender, thinking we could pay it back quickly. If we don't settle it soon, the interest will be unbearable. Please share some of the inheritance with us. It turned out that Alex and his wife had not only purchased the condominium but had also indulged in a lavish lifestyle after Dad's passing, gambling more than usual and splurging on designer clothes. That's not my problem, I replied flatly. Alex, clearly in panic, shouted, "You've always followed my orders before. You should just do as I say now." "When did this happen?" I snapped back at Alex. "I've built a life where I'm respected and contribute to society. I'm not the person I was back then. Don't think you can manipulate me forever." As my voice rose to match his, Alex collapsed to his knees and clung to me, sobbing. "Alex is asking for family support. You should help him," my sister-in-law chimed in, raising her voice as well. I retorted sharply, "You called me a stranger, insulted Dad, and dismissed our relationship. I have no obligation to help you anymore." "What? How dare you?" she fumed. "If you don't leave, I'll call the police. Are you okay with that?" At the mention of the word police, Alex and his wife bolted as if in panic. At the memorial service that followed, I encountered relatives who were still fuming over Alex's behavior. They recounted how Alex and his wife had botched Dad's funeral with their disorganized speeches and lack of decorum, leaving everyone in shock. After a lawyer informed Alex he had no claim to the inheritance, he had tried to track me down through our relatives. When they refused to reveal my whereabouts, he resorted to hiring a detective. When that failed, Alex ended up begging relatives for money, but they turned him down flatly. With no other options, Alex and his wife had to flee with nothing but the clothes on their backs to escape their creditors. Months later, it seems they're still caught in a cycle of evasion, perpetually on the run from their debtors. I can only imagine how weary his wife must be of this life, but she likely can't leave him and they must be constantly at odds. Meanwhile, William and I, unable to attend my father's funeral, make a point of visiting his grave once a month. Thanks to my father's support, I've become a nurse and found the love of my life through my career. I intend to honor his memory every day by giving my best in all that I do. I'm also getting married on September 10th, starting at 1 p.m., I mentioned casually. My younger sister's eyes twinkled with a mischievous glint as she smirked. "Oh, same day and time, huh? What a coincidence. But you're only having a small family affair, right? I heard you're keeping it under 100 guests. That's such a shame. We're going all out, inviting everyone we know, from family to friends and colleagues. Have your little event if you must." I bit back my initial response and chose my words carefully. "I'm Sarah, 30 years old, and I work full-time. I met Thomas, who's 3 years older, through a mutual friend. After dating for 2 years, we recently registered our marriage. Thomas works in the food industry and is genuinely kind and sincere. We're planning our wedding for next month, and most of the details are already in place. While many of our friends are opting for grand celebrations, we've decided to keep ours small and intimate, just with family. I prefer to avoid a mix of my parents and sister with my friends and colleagues. My parents have always favored my sister Melanie, who is 3 years younger and undeniably more attractive, something I can admit objectively. Melanie has always been their favorite, and I just wanted to avoid any awkwardness." With her striking eyes, long lashes, delicate features, and fair complexion, Melanie caught the attention of several talent agencies and worked as a teen model during her school years. My parents adored her and frequently compared her to me. "Sarah, you have such a plain face. It's hard to look at you," they would say. "Sarah, you lack charm. Melanie is like an angel, unlike you." They showered Melanie with new clothes and toys, indulging her every whim, while I was denied opportunities to explore hobbies. Melanie enjoyed piano, ballet, swimming, and more, but her interest was fleeting, and our parents never reprimanded her for it. Even when she failed tests due to her carefree attitude, they encouraged her, while I was harshly criticized for merely average grades. I often thought to myself, I wish you hadn't had me at all. Every time they voiced how they wished I had never been born. I wasn't allowed to respond as my parents criticized me and showered Melanie with affection. Unsurprisingly, Melanie grew up pampered and entitled, retaining her beauty but developing a cruel streak. "We don't look alike at all, sis. Your plain face is so pathetic," she would taunt, constantly putting me down. I was reluctant to introduce my parents and sister to Thomas or his family, but my in-laws understood the complicated dynamics and didn't push. Still, my parents insisted on a meeting, so we arranged a joint family dinner. On the day of the dinner, I was anxious as my parents, Melanie, and Thomas's parents gathered. Distracted by the fear of any potential mishaps, I barely enjoyed the meal. Despite the occasion being about my upcoming wedding, my parents showed little interest in Thomas. When we talked about how we met or our future plans, they responded with indifference, offering only a disinterested Instead, they lavished praise on Melanie during introductions. When my in-laws tried to steer the conversation back to me, my parents would dismiss it, saying, "Forget about her, let's talk about Melanie." Melanie added, "Mom, Dad, you're praising me too much. Anyway, there's nothing interesting about sis." It was disheartening to see my dysfunctional family dynamic unfold in front of Thomas and my in-laws, their expressions growing stiffer as the evening progressed. After their meal and their focus on Melanie, my family left without offering a single congratulation for our wedding. I was stunned by their lack of acknowledgement, and while Thomas gently comforted me, I never imagined they could be this hurtful. "You've had a tough time, Sarah," my in-laws said with sincere warmth. "We know you've been through a lot. We're thrilled to have you as part of our family now. Please feel free to rely on us like you would with real parents." Their kind words touched me deeply. I expressed my gratitude and decided it was time to share something I'd been contemplating. "I'm considering having a small, intimate wedding," I began, "because as you've seen, my parents and sister can be quite unpredictable. I'm concerned about what might happen if we invite acquaintances or friends. Would it be alright if we keep the celebration to just close family?" Thomas had already agreed to this plan, and my in-laws responded with a reassuring, "Of course." I breathed a sigh of relief. With their support, it was settled that our wedding would be a small, family-only affair. However, as the date approached, I was faced with an unexpected and shocking development. I was taken aback when I received an unexpected call from my parents. "Melanie is getting married. Her fiancé is here right now. You need to come over." When I arrived, I found my parents, Melanie, and her fiancé waiting. The man looked familiar. "Nice to see you, Sarah," he said with a hint of surprise. "I didn't realize you were Melanie's sister." "I'm surprised too," I responded. His name was Ethan Matthews, and he worked for one of my company's business partners. "When Melanie mentioned your name, I thought she must be talking about a different Sarah. I never imagined you two could be related. You don't look alike at all," he said with a dismissive tone. I was familiar with Ethan's condescending attitude from work. It was clear he looked down on me because I didn't have a college degree. My parents had always insisted, "You should work instead of going to college," so I joined the company right after high school. Meanwhile, Matthews had graduated from a prestigious university and seemed to judge others based on their educational background. The thought of becoming family with someone like him was unsettling, and I felt a strong urge to leave the room as quickly as possible. "Congratulations on your wedding. I'll be taking my leave now," I said, trying to exit gracefully. But then Melanie dropped a bombshell. "We've decided to hold our wedding on the same day and at the same venue as yours," she announced, with Ethan chiming in. "Our wedding will be far grander than yours," he said, a smug smile on his face. I was left stunned, unable to respond to their shocking announcement. Our venue was a large one, capable of accommodating multiple weddings in a single day. Although I had initially preferred a smaller, more intimate setting, Thomas and my in-laws had insisted on this grand venue to make our special day even more memorable. If Melanie and Ethan were planning an extravagant celebration, this venue would be perfect for them. But scheduling their wedding to coincide with ours seemed like a deliberate act of spite. Melanie and Ethan laughed mockingly. "Look at her, she's completely frozen in shock." "Are you okay?" they taunted. I tried to stay composed and asked, "What are you talking about? What about our parents and relatives? Which wedding are they supposed to attend?" Melanie remained unshaken. "Don't worry, Dad, Mom, and all our relatives will be at mine and Ethan's wedding," she said, her expression smug. Our parents immediately began calling our relatives to invite them to Melanie's ceremony. The relatives I had seen before had always favored Melanie, and now they either wanted to avoid conflict or believed her version of events over mine. Despite my attempts to explain that Melanie had announced her wedding date only hours after ours, they dismissed my concerns, calling me immature for even suggesting a conflict. Seeing the smug expressions on my parents', Melanie's, and Ethan's faces, I sighed in resignation and said, "All right, fine." I left the house, and no one came to see me out. As I closed the door, I could hear their mocking laughter echoing behind me. Back home, I apologized to Thomas and my in-laws for not being able to invite anyone from my side to our intimate wedding, even though I had initially suggested a small guest list. They were understanding and even suggested that with fewer guests, we could make the ceremony more elaborate. I was genuinely appreciative of their support. The wedding day arrived, and as I walked through the lobby, I encountered some of Melanie's relatives heading to her reception. I overheard them whispering, "Sarah is such a nasty woman compared to Melanie. She's so plain." I tried to ignore their remarks, focusing instead on making our day as special as possible. Our ceremony went wonderfully. Thomas's talented relatives put on a series of performances that filled the venue with joy and created a truly festive atmosphere. In the midst of our celebration, a commotion erupted as Melanie, Ethan, my parents, and Ethan's parents barged into our wedding. "Melanie, what's going on?" I asked, bewildered. Melanie abruptly shouted, "Everyone from Ethan's office is missing today. You must have done something." In reality, Melanie and Ethan's reception hall was nearly empty, with many seats unfilled, causing a heated confrontation between my parents and Ethan's parents. My parents angrily criticized them. What a disgrace. Ethan's parents, taken aback and upset by the unwarranted blame, were in a foul mood. Panicked, Melanie falsely claimed to Ethan's parents that our weddings had been deliberately scheduled to overlap due to our strained relationship, leading her to storm into my ceremony, accusing me of sabotage. My wedding was a disaster, and yet Sarah's is full of joy. It's infuriating. Melanie exclaimed, her frustration evident. "Melanie, please calm down," I pleaded, trying to de-escalate the situation. But Melanie ignored me and took to the microphone, shouting, "Attention, everyone. My sister Sarah is the worst person in the world. She's been bullying me since we were children." I rushed to intervene. "Melanie, stop this." But she ignored me and continued her tirade. "I look so much better in a wedding dress than she does. She's always been jealous of my beauty, and she's just a gloomy, depressing person," Melanie continued, making unfounded claims. Ethan chimed in, supporting her. "That's right. Sarah is just a high school graduate and completely useless," he said. He went on, "That's why hiring high school graduates is a mistake. I graduated from a top university and am extremely talented. I'm even friends with the CEO, so a promotion is a sure thing." Ethan continued to boast about his achievements, adding to the tension. However, when Ethan saw my father-in-law seated at the groom's family table, his face went white. Having been so confident in his boasting and disparaging comments about me, he now trembled in fear. "Why is the CEO here?" he stammered in disbelief. "Matthews, I'm very disappointed in you," my father-in-law said, his voice filled with anger. "Why is the CEO here?" Ethan asked in a panic. My father-in-law responded, "I am the father of the groom. There's your father-in-law." Ethan stood there, stunned and speechless, realizing that my father-in-law was indeed the CEO of his company. The reception venues for our weddings were adjacent, and before our ceremony began, I had overheard Ethan's guests discussing how the wedding dates and times had been intentionally overlapped. Upon learning the truth, Ethan's guests had been so frightened by the CEO's anger that they had fled the scene. "No, it's not what you think, sir. I had no idea. It was all Melanie's doing," Ethan pleaded desperately. Melanie looked at him incredulously. "There's no way I would sabotage Sarah's wedding. She's an important client's employee. What I said earlier was just a joke. I didn't mean it," Ethan continued with a weak defense, but he was cut off by my father-in-law's stern command. "Stop lying. I spoke with your colleague earlier and heard about the derogatory remarks you've made about Sarah," my father-in-law said firmly. Ethan, caught off guard and searching for an excuse, lowered his head in defeat. "Sarah is an exceptional woman. She couldn't attend college due to her family's circumstances but began working right after high school and has been dedicated ever since. Despite her challenging situation at home, she has always lived with integrity and kindness. Unlike you, she would never judge or belittle someone based on their education," my father-in-law continued, his praise making me tear up. Ethan stammered, Sir, I deeply apologize for," but was interrupted by my father-in-law. "You're apologizing to the wrong person. Apologize to Sarah and stay out of my son and his wife's lives from now on. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Ethan said, trembling uncontrollably. He turned to me, tears in his eyes, and apologized. "I'm truly sorry. I've had enough. Please leave," I said firmly. Melanie, bewildered, shouted, "What is happening? Why is this going on?" Ethan snapped at Melanie, "Be quiet. I regret ever marrying you." Melanie's face flushed with rage. "What did you just say?" she demanded. The two began to argue fiercely, and soon the venue staff arrived to escort Ethan and Melanie out. Their parents, stunned by the chaos, also quickly departed. With the disturbance gone, the remaining guests and I shook off the shock and continued the celebration. The reception resumed with a renewed energy and turned out to be an incredible event. I thanked my father-in-law, saying, "Father, I was deeply touched by what you said earlier. Thank you so much." He smiled warmly and replied, "I'm sorry for my subordinate's behavior. Thank you, Sarah, for marrying my son. If you ever find yourself in trouble, don't hesitate to reach out." Although Ethan was clearly anxious about facing consequences for his actions, the situation wasn't work-related, so he wasn't demoted. However, his attempts to ingratiate himself with my father-in-law in hopes of career advancement backfired spectacularly when his true character was revealed. Unable to repair his damaged reputation, Ethan could only discuss work-related matters with my father-in-law and was demoted to a lower position within the company. His previous behavior of boasting about being the boss's favorite had led to his isolation. Even his colleagues and subordinates began to avoid him, unwilling to make eye contact. By the end of the day, Ethan was likely just another employee to my father-in-law, especially since he hadn't even known who his son was marrying. News of Ethan's misdeeds quickly spread throughout the company, diminishing his comfort at work. He began to blame Melanie for everything and became violent towards her. Melanie responded by suing Ethan for domestic violence, while Ethan's parents filed a lawsuit against Melanie for ruining the wedding. The situation spiraled into a chaotic divorce drama. Melanie was distraught over Ethan's violence and the lawsuit from his parents, while Ethan and his parents claimed that Melanie and her family had interfered with Ethan's career and ruined the wedding. Both sides hired lawyers and prepared for a legal battle, but they were so fixated on their own narratives that they ignored any inconvenient truths. As the conflict dragged on, Melanie quickly depleted her funds due to wedding expenses and legal fees, making life increasingly difficult after the divorce. She had to move back in with her parents who had once pampered her but now treated her with disdain, labeling her as the disgrace of the family. Although I tried to distance myself, Melanie persistently called and emailed me, detailing her hardships. Despite my efforts to ignore her, I was inundated with hundreds of missed calls and unread emails. I blocked her abusive messages and pleas for money without responding. Soon, my parents began contacting me as well, begging for financial help. Their requests were relentless and annoying, though I couldn't tell if they were trying to cover their own wedding-related expenses or hoping to sway me with their pleas. The volume of their communication grew, becoming a significant nuisance. I blocked their calls and emails too. I anticipated they might visit in person, but they clearly lacked the funds for transportation. Ethan's parents, who should have been practically strangers to me, began persistently asking me to mediate with my father-in-law. They even tried to follow me home recently. I reported their behavior immediately, but they always fled whenever the police arrived. Their attempts to stake out my home became more frequent, prompting more police reports and increased patrols. For now, things have calmed down. In the meantime, I'm creating a loving home with my kind mother-in-law and father-in-law, who I now think of as my true family. I'm experiencing the genuine warmth of a family environment, something I had only heard about before. Here, there's no trace of the daughter-in-law bullying I had previously endured, and I'm discovering what it truly means to have a supportive and affectionate family. My name is Laura. 6 months ago, I married my high school sweetheart, Matt. We've known each other since childhood, so I've always been close to his family, which made the wedding process incredibly smooth. We share many mutual friends, turning our wedding into a joyous celebration filled with well-wishers. I promised to stand by Matt for the rest of our lives. A few months after we got married, I discovered I was pregnant. I was over the moon, and the blessings kept coming. Matt's mom was incredibly supportive, helping us out almost every day. Since we got married, we've been living with Matt's parents. As an only child, Matt was raised with a lot of love and care, so living with his parents after our wedding felt like the natural choice. I had no qualms about it and agreed immediately. From the day after our wedding, I enjoyed doing household chores with my mother-in-law, and we would chat about all sorts of things. When I announced my pregnancy, she cried tears of joy. celebrating as if it were her own good news. Whenever I tried to do anything around the house, she'd say, "Don't worry, Laura, I've got this," and take over. I'd reassure her, "I'm feeling fine today, really," but she'd insist, "You have to think of the baby first. Rest up," and stop me from doing anything. While I appreciated her concern, it reached a point where I was bored out of my mind. I had been working part-time, but I quit my job as soon as I found out I was pregnant, on the advice of both my mother-in-law and Matt. With nothing to do at home, I was going stir-crazy. I feel like moving around a bit. Can I go shopping? Need anything?" I'd ask, hoping for some freedom. But she firmly responded, "Absolutely not. You're not even in your second trimester yet. You need to rest," and wouldn't let me leave the house. I understood her concern, but it felt suffocating. She had a miscarriage before having Matt because she continued working, so she was worried I'd face the same fate. "If you're not careful, you'll end up in the hospital like I did," she warned me. Not wanting to create tension, I decided to take it easy until my second trimester. Once I reached that milestone, she started allowing me short walks. Matt and I would go out on his days off, buying snacks from a local store and having little picnics. Sometimes I'd go for a walk with my mother-in-law while shopping. She even started cooking with me again. I realized she was just deeply concerned for me during the early stages of my pregnancy. At 38 weeks, my water broke while I was climbing the stairs at home. With Matt and my father-in-law at work, my mother-in-law quickly drove me to the hospital. Matt had already coordinated everything with the hospital, so by the time our baby Brian was born, he was right there with us. Matt was the first to hold Brian. "Oh, he's so adorable," he said, his eyes welling up with tears as he lovingly gazed at our newborn. Seeing him so emotional made me tear up too. "Thank you, Laura. I'm so happy right now," Matt said, smiling at me, and I couldn't help but cry. "May I come in?" My mother-in-law, who had kindly stepped out of the room, peeked her head in. "Go ahead and hold him, Mom. He's really cute," Matt said, handing Brian over to her. I felt a bit awkward. My mother-in-law had been incredibly supportive and was eagerly awaiting her grandchild. What would she say now that Brian was here? The thought made me anxious. "Thanks to you, we were able to have Brian safely. Thank you so much," I said to her, grateful for all her support. But her response was unexpected. "He doesn't look like him." "What?" I asked, unsure if I heard her correctly. "What do you mean? He doesn't look like Matt. Are you sure he's Matt's child?" What was she talking about? This should have been a happy moment, but my heart started racing uncontrollably. "What are you saying?" Matt immediately confronted her, but she continued without apologizing. "Look at Matt's baby pictures. Brian doesn't resemble him at all," she said, showing us a baby picture of Matt on her phone. "Well, they don't have to look exactly alike," I started to say, but before I could finish, she stormed out of the room, exclaiming, "I can't deal with a child whose parentage is in question." "Hey, Mom," Matt said, following her out and leaving me alone. I looked at Brian's face and started to cry. He looked so much like Matt, especially around the eyes and ears. Matt never returned to the room and only texted me to say he was going home with his mom. I was stunned by his behavior but too exhausted to confront him. A few days later, on the day of my discharge, Matt came to pick me up but seemed distant. "What's wrong? We get to live together starting today," I said, trying to lift the mood, but he didn't seem happy. "Mom's still upset. Try not to provoke her," he said. I had just given birth and was mentally and physically drained. Why did I have to be considerate of her on the day I was discharged? I didn't say anything and the ride home was silent. The tension didn't ease even after we got home. As soon as I walked in, my mother-in-law greeted me with sarcasm, saying, "Oh, you're back." My father-in-law avoided eye contact and my mother-in-law continued with snide remarks. "I've told you many times, this child is Matt's. His name is Brian. Won't you please love him?" I pleaded, but she ignored me completely. "Say something, Matt," I cried out, but he responded coldly, "It's true. He doesn't look like me." At that moment, my tears dried up. Matt, who should have supported me, had abandoned me. Looking back, I wish Matt had stood up to his mother, but instead, he sided with her. I felt hollow and resigned myself to the idea that my mother-in-law might never love Brian. Matt wasn't helping with childcare either, which only added to my stress. "Can you feed him formula while I take a shower?" I asked. Matt replied, "I've been working all day. Why should I lose sleep over a child who might not even be mine?" I couldn't believe this was happening. "Never mind," I said, feeding Brian the formula myself and quickly taking a shower once he fell asleep. This had become my life. If it had only been my mother-in-law, I might have considered getting a DNA test to prove her wrong. But even Matt wasn't convinced Brian was his. That hurt more than anything. My parents had moved to the countryside soon after I got married, so I couldn't rely on them for support. They had been thrilled about my marriage and had welcomed Matt as if he were their own child, which made it impossible for me to confide in them. After months of this, my mother-in-law, who had been avoiding me, finally spoke up. "Laura, can you bring the baby to the living room?" "All right," I replied. My mother-in-law had been ignoring both me and Brian, and I thought she might finally apologize. But my expectations were quickly dashed when I arrived in the living room and found both her and Matt sitting there. "Could you please leave with that child?" she demanded. "What?" I was stunned and at a loss for words. She glanced at Brian and continued, "He still doesn't look like him. I've had enough." Matt remained silent. At that moment, I couldn't take it anymore. "Fine, if that's how you feel, I'll pack my things and leave," I said, grabbing the divorce papers and starting to pack. Matt said nothing and continued his conversation with his mother. "Make sure you pay child support," she said. "How can we when we're not even sure he's Matt's?" My mother-in-law shot back. I was seething with anger. Without saying another word, I left and went to my parents' house. I explained everything to them, and though they were initially confused, they welcomed me with open arms. I decided to stay with them while I looked for a job and saved some money. I had requested child support from my ex-husband through a lawyer, but the payments never came through. I was determined to cut ties with my ex and his family, so I chose not to press the issue of the unpaid support. Years passed, and Brian was about 6 years old when I received a call from a local friend who also knew Matt, informing me that Matt had died in a car accident. Although I heard about it soon after it happened, I chose not to get involved. Brian was in a busy, active phase, and we didn't attend the funeral. A month later, while catching up with local friends and returning to my hometown for the first time in years, I decided to buy a gift before heading to my friend's house. So Ryan and I went to a department store we used to visit as a family. "Laura," I turned around to see my mother-in-law, whom I hadn't seen in years. I stood there, stunned, as she quickly approached us and said, "You're Brian, right?" and began talking to him. "Brian, I'm your grandma. You really look just like Matt," she said. I couldn't tolerate hearing that. "Enough is enough. Because of you." "Wait," I started, but she cut me off. "Don't be so angry. I've wanted to see you for so long." Feeling my frustration rising, I said, "Excuse us," and pulled Brian away, leaving the scene. "Was that Grandma, Bri?" Brian asked. I had kept his grandmother's identity a secret until now, but Brian, now in elementary school, was genuinely curious and kept asking, "Is it Grandma supposed to be your mom? Who was that lady?" I couldn't avoid it any longer, so I explained it to him in simple terms. When we got home, Brian looked up at me and said, "Mama, you've been through a lot, huh?" As he patted my head. His kindness made tears well up in my eyes. I felt deeply grateful for having him in my life. A month later, my mother-in-law showed up at the apartment where Brian and I were living. "How did you find us?" I asked, surprised. She replied, "I asked around through Matt and our mutual friends. I finally tracked you down," and pushed her way inside. "Please leave," I said firmly. She responded, "Matt died in an accident, and my husband passed away from illness. You two are all the family I have left." Brian came out of the next room, likely drawn by my mother-in-law's loud voice. Spotting him, she said, "Brian, why don't you come live with Grandma? I have a bigger house and can give you lots of delicious food." "Stop it," I said, as my mother-in-law pulled out a thick envelope. "It contains $50,000 for child support. You two are all the family I have left, so please come live with me," she said, pushing the envelope toward me. Then she turned to Brian with a smile and said, "Brian, Grandma wants you to come live with her. I'll buy you anything you want, okay?" In that moment, I felt overwhelmed and on the verge of tears. I was torn between questioning why now and wondering if I should deny Brian the chance to have another grandmother. I was at a loss for words. Then Brian spoke up, "I'm not going." My mother-in-law let out a confused sound at Brian's words. "Brian, what are you saying? You can live with Grandma. There'll be lots of delicious food, and I'll buy you toys," she said, trying desperately to persuade him. "I don't want to. You were mean to Mama, right? My only grandma is Mommy's mom. Brian said, pulling away from her and sitting down beside me. My mother-in-law fell silent, her expression reflecting a sense of defeat. After staring at us for a moment, she abruptly stood up and left the house without another word. We haven't heard from her since that day, and she never visited us again. The child support money she left behind remains untouched, saved for Brian's future. When I consulted my parents about whether to return the money, they said, "You never received child support before, so it's fine to keep it." Taking their advice, I decided to keep it. I hadn't heard anything about my mother-in-law since then, but honestly, it no longer matters to me. I have Brian, who is so strong and steadfast by my side. Even at his young age, Brian protected me from his grandmother's advances and chose me over her tempting offers. I love him with all my heart and am committed to raising him responsibly. I want to ensure his happiness, even without a father, now and forever. //